I'm going to have a long conversation with our producers about butchering Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg. Anyone?
Do you think the audience hears what we just heard?
I'm pretty sure they did because I complained about it after, the last two nights, and they haven't fixed it. It started off good tonight, but then it rapidly deteriorated. And anyhow, we can't worry about that. This is Speak Free Radio, Legal Realism. Charles Edward Lincoln III, together with William Daniel Johnson. Uh, and he is here in a different capacity today because I want to talk to him about his life as a Nipponophile. Is that the correct term?
I've never heard it used before, but it communicates to me.
Okay. What does it mean? If it communicates with you, what does it mean?
Well, someone who is interested in Japan, and there's a lot of interest in Japan right now across particularly the younger generations. And so that's a good thing, I think. When I was a young child, I remember somebody and one of my relatives bought a stereo from Japan, and the people in the room made fun of it. Oh, you're buying that cheap stuff, that and it's amusing now to look to see how things have changed. I look on the internet. Someone was talking about a Mitsubishi automobile, and the Mitsubishi automobiles have kind of been panned, but the person says, "Oh, but the Mitsubishi is a wonderful car. It's made 98% in Japan by Japanese builders and workers, and so that's why it's such high quality." And so it's interesting that 60 years ago, Japan had a bad reputation because they made the little trinkets and toys that were exported to America, and then now they are at the pinnacle of manufacturing superiority.
Sort of taken the place of Germany, haven't they?
They have, indeed, because I think Germany used a lot of Turks in their manufacturing facilities, where Japan still uses the Japanese. But that's interesting. I went to Japan one time um, on an assignment, and I went to Bridgestone uh, tire manufacturer, and they took me through the factory before we did our work, and they looked on the screen. I looked at he said, "Look on the screen." All the factory workers were working there, and they said, "Well, look on the screen." I said, "Looked on it." So what do you see? And I said, "Well, it's not Japanese, not English." They said, "It's Portuguese." Do you know why it's Portuguese? And I said, "No, because none of these people speak Japanese, and they're all Japanese." And I said, I don't understand what's going on." He says, "Well, there's a large community of Japanese in Brazil, and they grow up, they only speak Portuguese, and we didn't have enough workers, so we put an ad out saying, 'Who wants to come work in Japan at a factory?'" And a whole bunch of them came, and they're doing a great job because they're Japanese, even though they don't speak Japanese.
Wow. That is amazing. That I wonder how long I've never heard of the Japanese community in Brazil. Where are they located?
In Brazil. It's actually the largest community outside of Japan for the Japanese. But then another thing, for example, that always comes up is that you'll notice that during World War II, you had the internment of the Japanese, Manzanar, and there's a lot of criticism about the Japanese internment in Manzanar. However, a lot of the older Japanese that I talked to, they weren't regretting it. They said, "Well, that's where I met my wife, and I thought it was fine." And if you go look at the Manzanar community, the little place where they're all interned, it's just a humble little road sign that you pull in there and look at it, nothing extravagant. And then you take a look at what the Jews have done all around the world for their travails during World War II, and it's just a difference of night and day. The Japanese underplay it, and the Jews overplay it.
I've never heard of Manzanar. Is that in Brazil?
No. It's in Central California. Or no,
Okay,
it's near Bishop. I guess that's not Central California. I'm sorry, but it's near Bishop, which is in the mountains, kind of north. Um,
because
but
they usually refer to it. I guess I'd never heard of the name of specific camps.
yeah,
There were a bunch of them, right?
yeah, there are several of them, and this is the one that I went to, and it's really understated. But people often say, Oh, it was terrible to intern the Japanese. They were American citizens and things like that. And what Roosevelt did was just absolutely horrible. But you want to know what was really over the top is he didn't do it in United States only. He went to Peru and he took all of the Japanese, first generation Japanese in Peru and put them in internment camps. So it wasn't even in his own country. He went to Peru and interned the first generation Japanese.
But he
So
didn't go to. But he didn't go to Brazil.
that was a lot of moxie. Well, I guess Brazil is not really, they weren't really on the coast, but
Oh, okay.
in Peru they were. And I thought, and I said to one of some of my clients, "Oh, that's terrible." And my client says, "No, that was great." And I said, "How is it great?" He says, "Because the largest bottler in Brazil for the largest cola company is Inca Cola in Peru, and Coca-Cola couldn't compete with them, couldn't compete, so they finally bought them out. Well, my father was a second generation Peruvian Japanese, and the owner of the bottler was first generation. So they took him away, and we got all the business. So we got the company. So we made millions off of what Roosevelt did. So don't tell me that Roosevelt did a bad thing. It made me wealthy. And so you've got both sides of the situation. I'm sure it was unpleasant for that first generation guy, but there's some people that benefited.
Well, that's fascinating, and I mean, I just, I really want to learn more uh, about this because you are part of a pattern. I mean, you got to tell the audience again. I don't know that you ever told this particular audience what your background in Japan is, but you are one of at least three or four actually uh, major nationalists, white nationalists, who has a strong Japanese background. And you're the one I know best. But I mean, there's this guy Felix Rex. I can't remember what his real name is, but he used to be called Black Pigeon, and he's the nearest to an internet sensation of the far right of anybody, and he spends almost all his time in Japan and is always praising Japan. And then there's Jared Taylor, and then I'd recently discovered that fellow you introduced me to, Charles Donner, also has a Japanese background. And okay, the my dad fought in the Pacific War. He was actually there from Pearl Harbor until like they bombed Bikini, so a year or two after the war. He was there for a long time, and he wasn't too fond of the Japanese, and the people of that generation generally weren't. They felt that Japan had done a terrible thing. 82 years ago yesterday was Pearl Harbor Day. Nobody celebrates it, but December 8th, they attacked Manila, which was the capital of a much more valuable American colony than Hawaii, really. Hard to believe now, but the Philippines were the biggest and the most productive of all America's colonies following the Spanish American War. And Japan wanted that too. So this is 82 years past the attack on Manila, which started, I am informed, 10 hours after Pearl Harbor. Uh, how did you become a Nipponophile? Is there an alternative word to Nipponophile?
I don't know, but when I want to digress a little bit. You said that your father was involved, or a year after the bombing, when a year after the war ended, when the bombing of in Bikini Atoll.
Yeah,
My mother, that was where they detonated the hydrogen bomb.
right.
My mother was involved in that. She was one of the lead secretaries, and in fact, the guy who founded UCLA Medical School was the guy in charge, and my mother was his secretary, and he
Wow.
he left there to go to Rand Corporation, and then the Rand Corporation decided they wanted to establish a medical school at UCLA, and his name was Stafford or Safford. I'm not Stafford, I think it was. And so Stafford took my mother to go establish UCLA, a medical school, but she was there at the Bikini Atoll hydrogen bomb bombing. So maybe your father was part of that stuff. I don't know.
Oh, he definitely was. No, he was in charge of radio communications. He was in charge of recording it and broadcasting it, basically.
Okay, yeah, because my mother was the secretary to the guy in charge. So that's very
Wow. I
interesting.
wish I had known you while he was still alive, because I could have asked him if he knew your mother.
Yeah, yeah, could have been. But anyway, you asked how did I become interested in Japan? Well, when I was in high school, my father came to me and said, "Billy, Americans don't speak a foreign language. You got to speak a foreign language." And he says, "You can either continue with piano lessons or you can learn a foreign language." And I hated piano lessons. So I said, "I'll take a foreign language." And then I went to Hawaii for college. First year, I was 17 when I went to college, bought a car there. Wasn't old enough to own a car. Got pulled over by the cops. And they said, "Well, you're not old enough to own a car." I said, "Well, I do." And so, but anyway, then I was called on a mission to Japan. And so then that's where I was really able to study and learn the language. And the Japanese language is so hard to learn that no matter how much you like Japan or you don't like Japan, if you learn the language, that puts you far and above any other American who is involved with Japan, because you can speak their language and they really appreciate it. And then you mentioned about the Philippines. One of my companions was a Filipino guy from Hawaii. My companion when I was a missionary in Japan, and he told me that his grandfather, they buried him up in Manila. The Japanese buried him up to his neck in the sand, and then they used they used a, what is it called, a samurai sword, like a golf club, to chop his head off. And so I don't know how much of this goes on, because I become suspicious of all these World War II atrocities, just like I'm suspicious of what's going on in Gaza right now.
Right.
That's what he said happened, and I do know that the Japanese of 1942 were a heck of a lot meaner than the Japanese of 2022.
Well, okay. And when you were a missionary and afterwards, how were you received in Japan? I mean, you say you learned the language. I assume it took some time for you to become really proficient. So when you were first there, uh, was it a good place? Was it a good place for an American to be?
Well, it wasn't very much long after after World War II, in comparatively speaking, when I was there. And so there was a lot of people who had World War II on their minds. And I went to the most rural area of Japan possible. In fact, they still had grass huts, and they had their floors were dirt, and they had just paper doors. They still have those. And in the wintertime, and it was just so cold, and they didn't have indoor plumbing. The toilets were just a hole dug in the ground. It was really kind of remote. And I remember that I lived on $90 a month, and we had to pay for everything, including housing. It was costing me $90 a month. That was really cheap. But one of the first words that I learned in Japan was inferiority complex and superiority complex. And I thought, why in the heck would I have learned those things? Because everybody that I went to, the older Japanese, they always says, "Well, Japan has an inferiority complex because we lost the war, and you guys have a superiority complex." And I said, "Well, so that topic would come up many, many times. So you can tell that at that period of time, the Japanese really were inward looking, and they felt defeated still a little bit. And they were increasing in GDP every single year, but at that time it was still kind of backward. Um, and
What part of Japan was this? Was it the main island, or was
It
it?
was the northern part of the main island. In fact, you have what's called kokeshi dolls that those nesting dolls in Russia.
Yeah.
It looks like that, only they're not nesting. It's just kind of one of those dolls, and it's called kokeshis, and you see them on their mantles a lot. And kokeshi means kill a child. And what would happen is they say, "What, you know what the kokeshi doll is?" I said, "Well, when we didn't have enough food to eat, we'd kill the child, and we'd put a doll up there on the counter because there wasn't enough food to go around. You want to preserve grandma, but a child, you can always have a new child." So this was really in the poorest area of Japan, and one of the first words I learned
Wow.
was kokeshi.
And
Kokeshi dolls.
and you also learned the word for cannibalism, I take it.
I don't think there was cannibalism in Japan, was there? I don't
Well,
know.
you just said that they
Oh
ate
no,
their children.
they killed the children. They killed the child because they couldn't keep them.
Oh, they didn't
I
eat
know
them.
in Australia, the Australian Aborigines would only want to have one or two child because that's all they could afford with all that low protein in their hunting, and so they would kill and eat their children. They'd have a boy and they'd have a girl and they'd kill and eat the other ones. But no, I don't know that the Japanese did that. I just know
Okay, they would.
they would kill.
That's interesting because you know what I have heard is discussions of abortion in Japan and how they create uh, sort of memorials to aborted children. Uh,
Oh, I didn't know that, but okay, yeah.
it's in studies of how different cultures have adopted to abortion, and I guess it's the same thing. I mean, basically, if they would kill a child who was already alive, they would certainly be in favor of abortion, and they and it was just the idea that it was an economic. It's recognized as a normally economic decision, lifestyle decision, and so but they keep memorials and they have little special cemeteries where they have I guess not. I don't know if they have the ashes of the aborted fetus or not, but uh, they deal in the memory of abortion as kind of a necessary thing. And anyhow, it sounds very similar to what you're saying. Infanticide and abortion obviously go kind of hand in hand. And I did not know that about Japan, so
Yeah, I
I
think
learned.
it's driven by the fact that they were really poor. A lot of times they were really poor, particularly in that neck of the woods. You know?
Well, infanticide has always been a factor all over the world, and a
Yeah,
lot of advocates of abortion don't like to admit that, but
yeah.
and a lot of opponents of abortion don't like to admit it either. But even in the 1950s, in places like third world places like Scotland, uh, I have and Yorkshire, I have talked to people who worked for the British National Health Service in those regions in the 50s, and infanticide was common in England.
Oh, really? I know that. But now, no, when I'm talking about the Kokeshi doll, this is a long, long time ago. It's not recent.
It wasn't during the post-war period.
No, 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 no. This was before. It's just like a lot of traditions are handed down generation to generation. This was not a recent
Oh,
development.
okay.
This was a long time ago, but that was one of the first words I learned when I saw those little dolls up there that didn't nest.
Hmm, interesting. So, so tell me, uh, how does it work being an American nationalist and a Nipponophile?
Well, the Japanese admire us that are nationalists for our identity realism, and they speak out kindly to me. I mean, I have had manga written about me. Manga is a Japanese magazines and little cartoons. I've had cartoons written about me in Japan, and I talked to various clients about things like that, and they said that a lot of times promotional efforts are done in the manga style. And I said, why is that? He says, well, we believe that's more real. You are projecting things that are more believable when you add pictures to it. But so I have never received from Japanese, I've never received any negative comments about any sort of nationalist political views. The Japanese are basically nationalist, but they have been influenced so heavily by the decadent West and our fear of being pro our own community that much of the elite in Japan they are really wanting to bring in people from other countries. But many, many years ago, I represented Japan's largest multi-level marketing company, and they were doing a lot of business in the United States, and I was in charge of setting them up. And one of the managers of this company, he was a white guy, a military man, married to a Japanese. So he went to the president of the company and said, look, Johnson is a racist. They said, oh, Johnson is the worst person you can think of. Da, 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 da. So the next time the president came into the United States and he gave a speech before all of the distributors and all the employees, and there were hundreds of people there, he spent 20 minutes talking about what good the WASPs have done into the world. And he did that the whole time, looking at me, and then he'd look at this general manager that complained to him. And he spent the whole time praising what the Northern European people had done to the world. And so he put that guy in his place. So,
And do you think, and would you say that that's a widespread view in Japan?
yes, absolutely. I get it all the time where they are praising the WASP prototype. Now, you don't hear the word WASP very much anymore, but it used to be bandied a lot. And also the Japanese, many of them are very skeptical of Jewish influence. And they talk to me a lot about what they consider to be undue influence by the Jews. One time I had a client contact me, and he wanted me to go, or maybe it wasn't a client, maybe it was somebody in our movement, asked me to go into a Japanese store in downtown Los Angeles and get some books on Judaism written in Japanese. So I went to Kinokuniya, which is the biggest bookstore in downtown Los Angeles, Japanese. Then I go up to the clerk there and I said, I'd like to get a book about Jews, and she said, about the Jews. And she says, well, do you want the pro-Jewish section or the anti-Jewish section? And so here in downtown Los Angeles, you had this whole bunch of books, and you had pro-Jews and anti-Jews, all in Japanese. And so it was big enough issue in Japan, even though there's very few Japanese there, and very few Jews there, that it was quite a lot written about. And
Fascinating.
probably
Fascinating.
one of the leading lawyers that dealt with Japan was a lawyer. He's no longer alive now, but his name is Isaac Shapiro. And I think his father conducted the Tokyo Symphony Orchestra. And so he grew up in Japan. He got very good Japanese, and he went to become an important lawyer dealing with Japan. And he was knighted by the Emperor of Japan. So, when I say that there's a lot of rank and file criticism of the Jews, there's also a lot of admiration for them, and they made this guy they knighted him. So those things happen too.
Knighted. What is knighthood in
Oh,
Japan?
you're given an award. It's like in England where they have the Order of the Royal Garter and the Order of this, that, and the other.
Right. Okay.
In
So
Japan, it's called, I guess, the
Order of the Chrysanthemum.
yeah, Order of the Chrysanthemum is the highest order you can get, and then there's others that are going in there, and they have Order of the Chrysanthemum with the rose, Order of the Chrysanthemum with something other like that with and so he was given one of those. But in England, I think they're chary with how they deliver those knighthoods and awards. In Japan, it's a big deal. They give a lot of them out. If you're a fantastic kimono maker, you're gonna get one of those awards. So it's not as common as uncommon as in England.
Oh, it's actually there are many levels in England too, and I mean Order of the Garter is pretty much the highest level, or Order of St. George. One of those two it would be. Those two would be up the very top. But there's something called the Order of the British Empire, And one British comedy show, they said, here, collect your OBEs as you go out the door.
I've heard the term OBE a lot after someone's names, and so that's really it's kind of a lowbrow. It's kind of the lower order of.
It's pretty much the lowest variety of knighthood.
But nowadays, when we were growing up, Anglophiles were so popular that if you had a knighthood or something like that, it was really something to be proud of. Nowadays, England is so messed up, you don't even want it. You know, it's like you're kind of like Marlon Brando turning down an Oscar award and having that Indian lady go up there and refuse it. Who wants an Oscar and who wants an award from King Charles, man? That's gross.
Well, he's a sad commentary. I hate to say it. That's another podcast. My knowledge of Japanese culture is very spotty. But one thing that I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned manga, and manga is related, I guess, in some way to anime, right?
Yes, yeah. They're both
what is the relationship between manga and anime?
um, manga is like in the book form. Anime, I think, is a lot
Oh,
on the
which
cartoon,
is
on television and things like that. And when you have uh, what is it called? Cosplay, costume play.
costume play.
That's a Japanese word. It came from Japan, and they mostly dress up as anime characters. But the mangas, if you ever go into a noodle shop in Japan, you're going to say you have all these salarymen working there. They're eating their noodles, and then they're looking at a manga. They're looking at a just a cartoon book. But the anime is more television or whatever it's called, film.
Okay. Question in regard to film and the film industry. Hayao Miyazaki.
And I don't know who he is.
You don't know who he is?
No.
Okay. Well, he's the Japanese producer of, I guess it's anime, that I know best. And if you don't know him, homework assignment. Go watch some videos of his
anime. I probably watched a maximum of 2 minutes of anime in my life.
Okay, well, you want to watch some Hayao Miyazaki because I think after watching about a dozen of his productions, I I believe he died recently, but I wish I would like to talk to someone. Maybe you could contact somebody who is close to him because, or maybe he's still alive. I'm not quite sure. But anyhow, I think he's a closet pro-Nazi because his vision, his stories all seem more German than Japanese to me. They are set in alpine looking European looking places, mostly with I mean obviously all in Japanese, but he's a fascinating character, and it seems to me that he's actually advocating for National Socialist positions in culture and heritage. And I was hoping that you could either confirm or disconfirm that suspicion on my part, because he's considered. You mentioned young people. You mentioned young people in the United States, and young people in the United States do watch a tremendous amount of anime, and those that are sort of sympathetic to us and our movement are particularly enamored of Hayao Miyazaki.
Well, it's not just unique to Hayao Miyazaki, although I don't know him. It's like when I was in Japan, I was meant to. I think that there's a kind of what's called the Japan Alps, and maybe it's Bandai Atami. Was that the name of the mountain area? Whatever was it? I was on a train going there. I think it was to Bandai Atami. I'm not sure, but it was some sort of up where there's a lot of mountains, and there were people hiking. And you get on the train, and you had all sorts of these Japanese men in lederhosen and hats with feathers on it. They wanted to make the whole shebang there. So they would dress up as the German Alpine people, and they would go hiking in that. And then,
Wow.
my wife played in a symphony in Tokyo, and she was the only American or only white woman in the symphony in there, and none of the musicians spoke English, but they spoke German because they would study more German because of the influence of music in Germany, and the medicine, if you in medicine, it used to be, I don't know how it's changed now, very much influenced by Germans, and their Roppo-Zinsho, which is Roppo-Zinshu, which is the six laws, that's patterned after the Napoleonic codes. So they have adopted very much from America and Europe and the West, and they're turning away from that now because we have abandoned our heritage, not just in America, but throughout Europe. And so they are now looking to other areas. Like, you don't see the investments in the United States as much. Now you see them investing in Singapore and Taiwan and Thailand and Malaysia and the Philippines, because they don't admire America anymore because we don't admire ourselves.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. And obviously, your career in California was largely related to Japanese investment in California, right?
I represent Japanese corporations worldwide.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a lot of it is California, but a lot of it is outside um, of California, and that's really kind of made me immune to a lot of the doxing that has occurred. Because whenever I get doxed, I end up getting more business because they want to show me that, hey, we like you, Johnson. Here's some more business. So I don't, I don't. Of course, I'm getting towards the end of my career now, but I've never had a problem with it. I am the only person I know that's hasn't really been doxed effectively.
Well, that's very interesting. And then there's the flip side of it. Does anyone in the American nationalist movement question your Nipponophilia?
Occasionally, but I find that many nationalists admire other nationalists, and they look at Japan as being nationalistic, even though it's not anywhere near like it was, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But they do have nationalistic streaks in them, and so people that are nationalists of whatever stripe, they admire my association with Japan. And that's just not white nationalists. I've talked to a lot of black nationalists, and they will begrudgingly admit the success of Japan, and they have expressed admiration that I'd spend the time to learn the language. I can't think of any time where I've been really criticized because of my association that with them.
And of course, part of the question is, what do you know or understand about the alliance between Imperial Japan and National Socialist Germany? In my little presentation on Pearl Harbor yesterday, I mean, I was talking about the irrationality of war and the irrationality of a lot of things that happened. And I don't know if anybody in Japan has ever talked to you about Pearl Harbor or Manila, but I was saying that I feel one of the reasons that I feel in my heart that Pearl Harbor was a Roosevelt plan was because it made no sense for Japan to attack us. We really didn't have any quarrel with Japan other than Japan's friendship with the Third Reich.
Well, we put embargoes, and Ron Paul, I think, makes the most elegant discussion of why embargoes are an act of war. We embargoed Japan so heavily, and I think this was part of a plan maybe to force their hand, but we embargoed them so heavily that they felt that they had to lash out. So maybe they were a puppet of the Roosevelt regime, but we had done so much to strangle them that they had to do that. Like, I had some major some Congress, what do they call them, elected officials come through my property in from Japan. They came through my property here, and there were growing wild castor beans all around there, because castor oil just is taken from the castor beans, and there are all sorts of castor plants growing around there. And I put all these Japanese guys, I gave them cowboy hats. In my pickup truck, I put a bale of hay in the back so they could sit on the bale of hay with their wives, in their suits, and drive them all around my farm. And when we drove past the castor plants, we got out there, and one of the Japanese says, "Hey, you see that plant over there?" Yeah. He says, "We grew those in Japan by the acre, because we use the oil, because we couldn't get oil from Japan, so we use that oil to fire up our what's it called, the engines and things like that." And so afterwards I went and I looked back, and I kind of Googled castor oil or whatever in Japan. Sure enough, that guy was correct, that because we arranged the embargo of their oil and everything else. I think they felt they had to lash out. And
Well,
maybe
okay, but did America have any grievance with Japan other than that? I repeat the question: did America have any grievance with Japan other than the fact that they were friendly with the Third Reich?
I think that is the reason for the embargo. And I think Japan and Germany were a little more optimistic regarding America's involvement, or regarding England's involvement, or whatever, or the powers that be. And so they made a fatal mistake that caused the death of so many different people. But
Yeah.
one point I want to make is that all these years later, there's a lot of people, not just in the white nationalist movement, not just in the other national movement, a lot of people are saying, "Hey, the wrong side won. Look at what happened to the West. World War II was terrible for us. It'd been a lot better if Germany and Japan had won the war." And I hear that quite a bit from people that are marginally mainstream. And so I thought, well, gee, if we think that way, what do the Japanese think? And so I've talked to the Japanese. Of course, the Germans, they're as lost can be. None of them think that they were in the right during World War II. And the Japanese, neither do the Japanese. The Japanese, sometimes when I talk to Japanese that were born in Japan, and their fathers fought in World War II and died in World War II, and they come and they talk to me, and they said, "Well, back then when we fought to do this," oh, oops, I mean when they fought, because he wanted to say, "I'm an American and Japan is they." And I thought, even the Japan, they just can't be proud of the imperialism that was Japan.
Well, there's so many different threads that are interesting to pick up here. One is, how did the Japanese become aware, if there are not a lot of Jews in Japan, how did they become aware of the Jewish problem? Is it through banking, or through writings of Henry Ford, or what is it?
That's a good question, because all I know is that I've heard negative things for the last 50 years. I don't know how they first come about. It started because they sided with Germany. They were aligned with Germany, and Germany taught them, and it stayed with them. It probably came from the German relationship. But that's a guess.
And so it's intriguing because basically, before we went online, I was asking you whether you'd agree that basically World War II was the beginning of the end for a white America.
Well, it certainly was a big step in the wrong direction, that's for sure. But I think, my opinion, I don't know for sure, but I think one of the most warmongering countries that have ever existed is America. And every single war that I can think of, except the Great Swamp Fight, which my ancestor was involved in 1635, every one of those, we were in the wrong. I mean, maybe not the Revolutionary War, but I don't know. We were fighting our cousins. So, all these wars are just terrible wars. The Vietnam War, we shouldn't have done it. The Korean War, we shouldn't have done it. World War II, we shouldn't have done it. World War One, we shouldn't have done it. All of these, what is it called? The desert wars, this Desert Storm, all those
Desert Storm, yeah.
done it. I can't think of any war except for the Great Swamp Fight that we that we were in the right.
Help me out. What was the Great Swamp Fight?
That was the first battle between with white people in America. It took place in Connecticut or Massachusetts, and basically the Indians were scalping the natives, and the Americans or the colonists, and the colonists were retaliating. They got in a big old battle, and the first captain that was killed was Captain Isaac Johnson, which was the second generation that came here. And if you go look at the Faneuil Hall up on the museum, there's a big old painting over there where Captain Isaac Johnson getting shot at the Great Swamp Fight. He was the first captain killed, and that was my ancestor.
So this was before the so-called King Philip's War.
Yeah, and King Philip, he was an Indian, right?
Yes, yes, he was.
Yeah. It was way before that. So maybe we were on the right side in that one too. I don't know.
Anyhow, one symptom of the fact that World War II was the beginning of the end for white America, I think, is that if you trace the origin of the movement that you are a major part of, and I'm a very minor part of, the white nationalist movement in America, it really didn't exist as a movement prior to World War II. It really traces back to the earliest glimmerings of it were America First, and Charles Lindbergh, and Eustace Mullins, and Father Coughlin, and all of this really had to do more than anything with alliance or opposition to Germany. I mean, my great grandfather, one of my great grandfathers, I should say, was a lawyer and a judge here in Louisiana, and he was actually one of Huey Long's promoters. And I live a couple of blocks from a beautiful old house on St. Charles Avenue that belonged to an associate of Jefferson Davis right after the war, and it later became the German consulate in New Orleans. And my great grandfather spoke German, and he introduced Huey Long to the German consul and initiated basically what could have become a very interesting alliance had Huey Long lived, and especially if he had become a major candidate for presidency in 1936, as he definitely would have if he hadn't been assassinated.
That's what I'd heard. I heard that he would have been given a good run for his money against Roosevelt, and he might have become president, and we'd have a totally different world.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting that my father, when I was growing up, he said, one of the men that I admire most of all is Huey Long, and he was really promoting Huey Long to me when I was a little kid, and I would always get that mixed up with Louis Long. Louis Long was my uncle, and he got convicted of tax fraud, and he was a partner with one of the Mormon prophets, and so they had to divest himself of all. It was Spencer W. Kimball. They had to divest themselves of all of their radio stations because my uncle was a felon, and so there was hatred among the two families for years and years. And I'd always mix up Huey Long and Louis Long, but it wasn't until years later that I realized who Huey Long was, and he was really a great guy.
He was an American National Socialist who opposed big corporations and particularly Jewish money. Yeah. And he was assassinated by someone. They say there's a lot of controversy in Louisiana about whether the person who assassinated him was actually Jewish or not. He had a Jewish name.
But the one thing is, do you know what Huey Long said? His last words.
I have so much to do.
I have so much to do, and I thought about that. I thought, well, when I die, am I gonna think, oh, I have so much to do, and so that stuck with me. We all have so much to do, and of course, his came a lot earlier. His death came a lot earlier than it's coming for you and I, you and me. But yeah, it's something that I think of. I've got so much to do.
But anyhow, the point of bringing him up is this is the birth of this movement. The birth of our movement was in a choice between basically socialist and Jewish control in England, United States, and Russia versus non-Jewish control in Germany and I guess Japan. And I I have never understood quite how the alliance between Germany and Japan evolved, but that is basically a constant feature from the 1930s forward of how this movement that we're a part of came into existence. And I really want to explore here in this podcast and with you, and I'm hoping I can maybe get Jared Taylor to talk about his perspective here on why it is that this divide in the world happened and how it happened, and how it is that basically American nationalism. I mean, a couple of 10 right before Thanksgiving, we had this podcast where I was positing that Israel could not exist without enemies, that Israel depended on a constant state of warfare to maintain its existence. And what's interesting is that nationalism, in a sense, is very our nationalism is very much along the same route. We exist and have existed from the beginning to say that the wrong side won World War II, and that basically the result of World War II and the modern world order can basically be blamed on one cultural and economic group more than any other.
Well, I think that if you take a look at even before World War II, if you take a look at the end of the Civil War, I mean, you have that movie called Birth of a Nation that talked about the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, and that was such a popular movie by what was it?
D.W. Griffith,
Yeah,
the founder of Hollywood, basically.
yeah,
The
that organization became had millions of members, and so I think that also is a root of recognizing white nationalism. But yeah, I think that it died down because a lot of the Southern men were oppressed so greatly that they had to leave the South because of the radical Republicans that were just exacting revenge on them. That a lot of them came to Los Angeles, and there was a big Southern influence in Los Angeles for a while. But then I think you're right. Then that maybe World War II was a big impetus for change.
well, here's the thing about the KKK in the 1920s. The KKK in the 1920s. I mean, can you picture the electoral map of the election of 1924?
No, I don't know.
Look at it. The Democratic Party was the 11 southern states, the 11 seceding southern states. Didn't include Missouri or Kentucky or Maryland. The 11 seceding southern states all went for John W. Davis, who coincidentally was the one who argued Brown v. Board of Education 30 years later.
Oh, Jay. But also, even when we were younger, you have what's called the Dixiecrats, and the Dixiecrats were Democrats, but they were very much to the right of what the MAGA people are today.
Oh, well, you're talking about Strom Thurmond's group in 1948. That is a post-World War II movement. Thurmond, like George Wallace, was a veteran of World War II, and I believe Thurmond was actually in the Normandy invasion, and he came back a war hero, and that's essentially his identity that got him the governorship of South Carolina. And initially, he got tremendous praise from the liberal press because he was trying to upgrade black schools in South Carolina, and he was basically trying to recognize the flaws of segregated South, which was that we had promised separate but equal, but we had delivered the separate but not the equal. And that was basically his campaign. And at first, the New York Times and that group were saying, "So he's so great," but then he came out against integration at the '48 Democratic Convention, where Harry Truman was nominated for his own full term, and he and his group walked out, and they carried 5 southern states, but that was not enough to beat Harry Truman, and that I mean again that's interesting because the Dixiecrats, I would say, there's this decline of the South, and then simultaneously the birth of American nationalism, and that those are they're not exactly the same movements. The Southern Democrats of 1924, who all voted for John W. Davis, uh, and the Strom Thurmond and George Wallace Democrats, they were originally not exactly white nationalists. They were trying to preserve the Southern way of life and a Southern tradition.
Yeah. But see, the term American nationalist was an incredibly offensive term until who came along? Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he said, I'm an American nationalist. He said, you can't call yourself a nationalist. That's harkens back to Nazism in World War II. He says, well, too bad, I'm a nationalist. And so I really think, even though white nationalists has been a small group for a long time, it was Donald Trump that has kind of given cachet to the N word, nationalism.
The N word. Now there's a double entendre for you. There's an interesting double entendre. I don't know. I have to say, Robert Stark. I think you remember Robert Stark, a mutual friend of ours.
Did he have autism a little bit?
A little bit, yeah.
I'm thinking of the right guy. I think right. Okay.
He's got his own podcast right now, and he wrote just the other day that basically Donald Trump is like a synthesis of the careers of Nelson Rockefeller and Richard Nixon, who in '64 were major opponents. The Rockefeller and Nixon were formally on opposite sides, but he was saying, I mean, Trump is just such a strange concatenation of different things because and the Republican Party itself, it's I guess the thing about Reagan and Trump both is they made people like us feel better, but they really haven't done anything for us.
But the thing is that, see, there's so much of America that just hates what our society is. And they looked at Donald Trump as a wrecker of society. They want someone who is mercurial, who's going to come in and just clean house. That's what the popularity of Donald Trump stems from. His actual practice may not be that, but his reputation is one that's going to upturn the tables and start all over. And that's what a lot of us are hoping he's going to do. Like, people are saying, oh, we can't have Donald Trump coming in there because he's just going to have retribution on everybody. We're going to end the democracy. He's just going to come down hard on everything. And I'm thinking, yeah, there's so much that I want to come down hard on. I want to give him a chance. And if he doesn't do it, at least we had that chance.
I don't know. I mean, if we started a couple of months ago to attempt to follow his indictment cases, and we kind of got derailed on that. That's more my fault than anybody else's, but I still follow those cases a little bit, and it seems very likely. A lot of people think it's very likely that he will be convicted. What is your prediction as of December the 8th, 2023?
I think that the reason why so many people in power are going after him is because they fear him. They fear what he's going to do. And I have never seen an individual who stands so strongly against all this opposition. Other people would quit. I mean, people always, oh, I'm going to resign, I'm going to quit so I can spend more time with my family. Donald Trump rolls up his sleeve and he starts calling people names. You know, he doesn't like the judge. He calls the judge names. The judge says, "Well, I'm going to give a gag order on you," and he calls the judge names. He said, you know, he just doesn't back down. So that's what a lot of us are hoping is going to happen. So.
Well, that's as good a place to end to wind up our hour. Bill, thank you very much for joining me today, and I really want to continue this line of discussion, so I hope I'll be able to get you back on. And, you know, Pearl Harbor Day yesterday, Manila Bay today, and World War II started evolving from here, and so did we.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Hey. And this is the Flying Dutchman, and once again, Bill Johnson and I are both like kindred spirits, Flying Dutchmen sailing off into the unknown seas. Charles Lincoln for Speak Free Radio in New Orleans. Legal realism, the politics and rituals of law. Have a good weekend, everybody. It'll be a good one in New Orleans.